No real changes can be made, and no evolution, by just tightening criminal laws or otherwise forcing people from above to comply to certain new rules or abandon old rules. For example, by merely prohibiting the physical punishment of children, no progress toward a more liberal and empathetic education can be made. Human behavior cannot be rammed into people, and where this happens, we are in a totalitarian environment that disregards the basic human need for freedom, in which only true growth is thinkable. Governments overlook this basic fact of life and continue drafting ineffective laws, while at the same time favoring ideologies that deny the human need for intelligent self-regulation. The awareness process is first of all an individual process, and only as a consequence of this, a collective endeavor. To initiate this process, we look at what is and not at what should be. If we see what is, we can as a result see why it is as it is. If we ask what should be, we build an ideal that is different from the reality we are living in, and we split ourselves in two, an observer and a dreamer. The observer sees what is, the dreamer longs for what should be. The first is a realist, the second is an ideologist. To become whole requires us to acknowledge this split and to face our sadistic drives and desires, our need to compensate for all the hurt we ourselves have suffered in early childhood. It requires us to face our inner wounds and become vulnerable again for feeling with, for compassion, and thus develop empathy. The next step then is to become aware where our need for violence is rooted in. When we observe pleasure, we see that its repression more or less automatically creates violence. Violence is a negative pleasure function in the sense that it comes about when pleasure is repressed. Once we are eventually able to see this, we will understand how definite and fatal the consequences are of repressing our children's natural need for body pleasure. Then and only then we are ready to gain more insight into the precise mechanisms that perpetuate violence. We then are namely able to see that the physical punishment of children is one of the pillars of handing over the violence paradigm from one generation to the other. We will then also comprehend the link between the repression of emotions and the upsurge of perversion as a secondary drive structure, while the unbent human nature in children is not perverse and not pervertible. The distortion of perception that goes along with thwarting natural emotions in early childhood is the key for understanding why humans can be bought into denying themselves the most basic of fulfillment there is in life, love. And it is because we ourselves were deprived in the first place of the freedom to develop our full emotionality in childhood that we deny to our children and instead instill in them fear, suspicion, and violence. If we looked at things with an innocent eye and without any moralistic paradigm, we would naturally perceive that children are emotionally much more balanced than we are as adults. And naturally raised children are not only not sadistic, they are also what counts even more, sexually not sadistic, and thus achieve sexual fulfillment without threat and without violence. I bet that if the thought of sexual children scares you, you have a basically defensive life paradigm, and that if you are okay with children being emotionally free, having their autonomies, preferences, rights, and sexual adventures, you tend to have an open life paradigm.